welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is, well, it's pretty simple. We take these really complex sources and moments in time, and we try to deliver the essential knowledge you need to grasp the true turning points of history.
And today we're looking at a moment that is just, it's a perfect study in unintended consequences.
Absolutely. We're talking about a point where history didn't unfold over years, but really in the span of a single afternoon.
When five men met in a secret meeting and, well, they completely rerouted the global economic river forever.
We're talking about the Plaza Accord, signed on September 22, 1985. Yep. And we're going to trace the immense pressure that built up to that moment.
We'll look at the precise moment the agreement was struck, which was really to save the U.S. economy.
And then the catastrophic flood of financial instability that followed, which, ultimately defined Japan's economic reality for decades to come.
Yeah, decades. It's a staggering story.
So let's start with this metaphor we've been using, the idea of a dam. The water rising behind that dam, that's the slow, crushing buildup of political and economic tension leading right up to 1985.
Yeah.
And the main force driving that water level up was the just staggeringly overvalued U.S. currency.
The era of King Dollar.
Exactly, the reign of King Dollar.
And that's really where you have to start. The dollar's strength wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. It was driven by policy.
If you go back to the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, the U.S. was grappling with this just crushing inflation. And Paul Volcker, who was the chairman of the Fed, he decided to solve it with brute force.
You didn't mess around.
Not at all. He dramatically hiked U.S. interest rates. We're talking sometimes into the high teens, unheard of.
And Volcker, he succeeded in his main goal, right? He did kill inflation.
He did. He absolutely broke its back.
Right.
But the side effect, the global domino effect, was just massive and deeply destabilizing.
And the mechanism is so simple when you break it down, but the consequences were global.
It's fascinating. Those extremely high U.S. interest rates, they acted like a colossal magnet for global capital.
Right. If you're an investor sitting in, say, Tokyo or Frankfurt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why would you put your money anywhere else? You could invest at home and maybe earn 4 or 5%.
Yeah.
Or you could put it in safe U.S. Treasury bills and get 12, 13% practically guaranteed.
A no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer. So this created this massive, sustained global demand for U.S. dollars.
And that demand just drove the dollar's value into the stratosphere. By early 1985, some estimates say the dollar was overvalued by, as much as 40 or 50%.
Yeah, against key currencies like the Japanese yen and the German Deutschmark. It was king dollar, for sure, but it was also kind of a global wrecking ball.
And it created this really profound double-edged sword for the U.S. economy itself.
It did. On the one hand, if you're an American consumer or a tourist, it's great. Foreign goods are cheap. Travel is cheap. Imports just flowed in.
But, and this is the critical part,
yeah,
this is where it became an existential crisis for American industry.
Absolutely.
If your dollar buys 40% more yen than Japanese products, which we're talking everything from Sony Walkmans to Toyota cars, they suddenly became incredibly cheap for American buyers.
And the flip side is just as bad. Iconic American exports, like heavy equipment from Caterpillar or agricultural products or even Boeing jets.
They became prohibitively expensive for anyone trying to buy them overseas.
You just couldn't compete. You saw this massive shift in economic power. The U.S. manufacturing base, the Rust Belt, it just began to hemorrhage jobs and market share.
Which leads us directly to the core problem that these five men had to solve. This staggering imbalance in trade.
Yeah, let's put some numbers on that because it really shows the scale.
Okay, so the U.S. current account deficit, which is the broadest measure of trade, right? It includes goods, services, investments, everything.
All of it, yeah.
It had swelled to a completely unsustainable 3.5% of GDP.
Which is a huge number.
In hard dollars, the balance of payments deficit hit a near-record $31.8 billion.
In a single quarter.
In just the second quarter of 1985.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
And that money wasn't just vanishing, it was flowing directly to the export powerhouses. Japan was running this massive structural surplus of over 4% of its GDP.
And West Germany had a big surplus, too.
A very substantial one. They were selling far, far more than they were buying from the U.S. and effectively, subsidizing their own growth by relying on American consumers.
And what's so fascinating is how this dry financial data, these numbers, quickly morphed into this intense political reality.
Oh, absolutely. The pain that was being felt by American manufacturers, in the Rust Belt, in the textile mills. It created a political firestorm that landed right on Washington's doorstep.
And the narrative was simple.
Simple and very dangerous. The idea that took hold in Congress was our trading partners, and especially Japan, are taking advantage of us. And this led to the resurgence of the most dangerous word in international finance.
Protectionism.
Protectionism.
And this wasn't just, angry speeches. Our sources say hundreds of protectionist bills were circulating in Congress.
Hundreds. Aiming to punish trading partners with these crippling tariffs and quotas. This wasn't minor stuff either. We're talking about really targeted legislation like the Rostenkowski textile bill.
Which would have imposed blanket quotas on imports.
A disaster. And the Treasury Secretary, James A. Baker, he understood the gravity of this. He saw this torrent of legislation as a loaded gun pointed squarely at the head of the global economy.
The stakes were nothing less than preventing a worldwide trade war, a repeat of the 1930s.
A scenario just frighteningly reminiscent of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act and the Great Depression. He knew his history.
So the pressure on Baker was just immense. If he failed to act, Congress was going to act unilaterally, and that would trigger chaos.
Right.
But the key insight here, and this speaks to who Baker was, is that he was a skilled political pragmatist, a deal maker.
Very much so.
And he realized his primary job wasn't just managing currency rates, it was managing the political fury at home.
So his strategy shifted. Instead of conflict, he chose coordination. And this is the brilliant part. He decided to use the very threat of congressional protectionism as his ultimate leverage.
The threat became the tool.
Exactly. He could go to his counterparts in the G5, that's Japan, Germany, France, and the UK, and just present a really stark choice.
Cooperate with us to bring the dollar down in an orderly way.
Or face the unpredictable, destructive chaos of unilateral American tariffs.
He picked up the phone. And he needed a very specific kind of venue for this negotiation. Private, rapid, decisive.
Which brings us right to the fulcrum moment. The location. The opulent Plaza Hotel in New York City. The date. September 22, 1985.
And this wasn't your usual G7 summit with all the fanfare and media?
No. This was high-stakes diplomacy orchestrated behind tightly closed doors. The goal was crystal clear. Fundamentally re-engineer the world's currency markets in a single afternoon.
So let's set the scene inside that gilded cage. Room 7 on the 10th floor. You've got the finance ministers of the G5 gathered around this polished mahogany table.
And crucially, no press. Minimal staff. Baker wanted that direct, unscripted negotiation that's only possible when it's just the principals in the room.
You had Baker, obviously, leading the charge for the U.S.
And facing him were 4 really pivotal figures. Gerhard Stoltenberg from West Germany, Nigel Lawson from the UK, Pierre Bérégovoy from France.
The Europeans were also feeling the pain of the strong dollar, but they were wary of this kind of intervention.
They remembered previous failures. But the real tension in the room, the absolute focus, was on the Japanese finance minister.
Noboru Takeshita. And that's Noboru Takeshita.
He held the key. Baker laid out the political reality, the congressional gun, and then he made this radical proposal. A joint public declaration that the dollar was overvalued.
And a commitment to coordinated intervention in the currency markets to force its value down.
The negotiation was incredibly intense. Unanimity was the key. And Takeshita knew, he knew intimately, that agreeing to this was a direct assault on the very economic model that had fueled Japan's post-war miracle.
Companies like Sony, Toyota, Mitsubishi, they all relied on a relatively weak yen to make their products competitive around the world.
And the Japanese predicament, which Poyuk Yoten, who was in the delegation, wrote about so well, it was just immense.
The U.S. proposal, it was wrapped in the language of cooperation, but really,
it was a demand for Japan to self-inflict a wound on its most successful industries. Agreeing to this was practically political suicide for Takeshita back home in Tokyo.
And this is the true near miss of the Plaza Accord.
Yeah.
For a few tense minutes, Takeshita held the fate of the entire global economy in his hands.
Every fiber of his being, a man dedicated to promoting Japanese industry, must have just been screaming for him to say no.
From a purely national economic view, no was the logical answer.
Of course. But the calculus was geopolitical. If he had walked away, the meeting would have failed. Baker would have lost his leverage against Congress.
And that protectionist gun would have fired.
Absolutely. Triggering a vicious 1930s-style global trade war that would have plunged everyone, including Japan, into deep, deep chaos.
So Takeshita was trapped. He wasn't choosing between a strong yen and a stable yen.
No, he was choosing between 2 forms of economic poison.
Option 1, an immediate, controlled and, yes, painful appreciation of the yen, managed cooperatively.
And option two, chaotic, hostile, and potentially crippling tariffs imposed unilaterally by the U.S. Congress.
And faced with that choice, he chose control over chaos. He chose the lesser of two poisons.
The sources describe the moment so quietly, just a slight, almost imperceptible nod.
Wow.
And in that tiny movement, he saved the G5 alliance. He avoided a global trade war.
But he unknowingly condemned his own nation's economy to this staggering torrent of unintended consequences.
The deal was struck. The men shook hands. But the speed and the brutality of the market reaction that followed, I don't think any of them, not even the shrewd James Baker, truly saw that coming.
The weapon they forged was a masterstroke of understatement. It wasn't some complex 100-page treaty.
Not at all. It was a simple 4-sentence communiqué, a press release issued quietly on a Sunday afternoon.
Deceptively simple. But the message inside was a financial nuclear bomb. The key code that the markets instantly deciphered was the G5's agreement that, and I'm quoting here, some further orderly appreciation of the main non-dollar currencies against the dollar is desirable.
That one phrase, orderly appreciation.
That was the public declaration of war on King Dollar.
And they backed it up by saying they were ready to cooperate more closely to encourage this. That was the signal. That was the G5, the world's financial heavyweights, publicly declaring a unified, coordinated attack on the dollar's value.
The significance was just immense. This signaled the end of years of just passively accepting the dollar's overvaluation.
The news flashed across trading terminals just seconds before the Asian markets opened for the week. It was a starting gun. The intervention began before the central banks had even physically started moving money.
And the effect was instantaneous and just brutal. It far surpassed what those ministers in the Plaza Hotel had been aiming for. They wanted orderly depreciation.
They got a stampede, a disorderly rout.
In the first 24 hours alone, the dollar plummeted over 4% against the yen. That's a shocking move that instantly shook the entire global system.
It's one of the most dramatic single-day shifts in modern currency history.
We should appreciate the sheer scale of this financial collapse. Before the accord, the dollar was trading at around 242 yen.
And the markets, they just understood. The G5 had declared a one-way bet against the dollar, and the traders rushed for the exit with a fury that completely dwarfed the actual intervention efforts by the central banks.
Within a single week, the dollar had crashed right through 220 yen.
Traders knew, if the 5 most powerful finance ministers in the world want the dollar to fall, it is going to fall. And they wanted to be way ahead of that curve.
The momentum was just self-fulfilling and uncontrollable.
And the speed of it shocked the participants themselves. The orderly appreciation they planned for was just overwhelmed by market forces. The central banks were playing catch-up, not leading the charge.
By the end of 1986, the dollar had dropped below 150 yen.
And by the end of 1987, just 2 years after the accord, it had lost more than half its value against the yen. It plunged past 130 yen to the dollar.
So the overvaluation problem that had been plaguing American industry, it was fixed, spectacularly and completely.
But that spectacular fix came at a massive, massive cost. The trade imbalance was essentially swapped for a massive currency imbalance.
And a tidal wave of capital was now rushing in the opposite direction.
And it was about to slam right into the shores of a single, highly leveraged and already successful country, Japan.
The Plaza Accord succeeded in its goal for the U.S., but its consequences basically pointed a loaded economic gun right at the heart of the Japanese export machine.
With the yen's value nearly doubling in 2 years, the effective price of Japanese goods sold abroad also doubled, almost overnight.
I mean, just imagine you're trying to run a business where your core product suddenly costs twice as much in your biggest market.
The shock to the export sector was immediate and severe. Japanese economists even gave this crisis a specific name, Endaka Fukyo.
The strong yen recession.
Exactly. And the Bank of Japan, the BOJ, they faced an immediate national emergency. Their job was to stop this currency shock from collapsing the whole economy into a deep, painful recession.
So they reached for the textbook solution.
The only one they had, really. Aggressively slash interest rates to historic lows.
The logic, on paper, was perfectly sound. Make money incredibly cheap to borrow. I mean, we're talking rates that dropped all the way down to 2.5%.
The goal was to stimulate massive domestic demand, encourage Japanese companies and consumers to spend at home to compensate for the export sales they were losing abroad.
And this right here is where the causal chain takes the fatal turn. This is the policy misstep that transformed a necessary correction into a decades-long catastrophe.
The Bank of Japan pumped an ocean of cheap cash into the financial system. But that cash, it failed to flow into productive investment, building new factories, hiring more workers.
And this is a really critical detail for you to understand because it explains the bubble. Why did companies stop investing productively?
Because their export profits were vanishing thanks to the strong yen. Why would you invest in expanding capacity when your main international market is just drying up?
It makes no sense.
Exactly. It's what economists sometimes call a liquidity trap. The cheap money was there, but the velocity of money, the rate at which it actually changed hands for productive stuff, it just stalled.
So instead, all that available, nearly free credit, it poured into purely speculative assets that promised much higher returns.
The stock market and, critically, the real estate market.
And this was made easier by the existing structure of the Japanese financial system, right? Land was the primary collateral for everything.
Everything. Banks were eager to lend at rock-bottom rates, and because land values seemed guaranteed to rise forever, companies and individuals borrowed immense sums to buy more real estate and more stocks, leveraging themselves to the hilt.
The result was the creation of what is still widely seen as the greatest financial bubble the modern world had ever seen.
Asset prices just became completely divorced from any underlying economic reality or corporate earnings.
The numbers are just astronomical. The Nikkei 225 index, which is the benchmark for the Tokyo Stock Exchange, it didn't just climb, it tripled.
Tripled in value in 4 frenzied years.
And the peak of this mania. It arrived on December 29th, 1989. The Nikkei hit its all-time high of 38,915.87.
It was pure financial euphoria, just an illusion of endless wealth built entirely on the cheap money the BOJ had injected to cushion the blow of the Plaza Accord.
And to really understand the sheer unhinged reality of that time, you have to hear the anecdotes that were circulating.
Oh, yeah.
The story that the total land value underneath the Imperial Palace grounds in central Tokyo was literally worth more than all the real estate in the entire state of California combined.
It sounds insane, but people believed it.
Right.
This wasn't growth. It was pure credit-fueled speculation. The price-to-earnings ratios of Japanese companies soared to 60 or 70.
Meaning it would take 60 or 70 years of profit just to justify the stock price. It's a completely unsustainable metric.
The whole financial system was a house of cards built on debt and inflated property values.
But eventually, reality has to assert itself.
It always does. The Bank of Japan, finally terrified of the insane, destructive bubble it had helped create, began a series of aggressive interest rate hikes in 1989 and into 1990. They were determined to pop the speculation.
And the pop was a seismic event.
The stock market crashed immediately. It collapsed 30% in 1990 alone. And real estate values followed, just vaporizing, because the bank's collateral base land was suddenly worth a fraction of the debt held against it.
By August of '92, the Nikkei had plummeted down to the 14,000 level.
Trillions in national wealth, just wiped out. The engine of the Japanese economy seized up, paralyzed by bad debt and asset deflation.
And this collapse marked the official start of what became known as Japan's lost decade.
A period of low growth, deflation, and economic stagnation that, frankly, has lasted far longer than 10 years. It created the structural challenges that Japan is still grappling with today.
And the crucial takeaway here is that the stagnation wasn't a direct result of the Plaza Accord itself. It was born directly from the disastrous domestic policy choices, the extreme interest rate cuts that followed the Accord's rapid currency shock.
The foreign policy solution created a domestic disaster.
So we arrive at the wreckage. And it's tempting, when you look back, to search for a villain in this story, to find a single point of failure.
It's a natural instinct.
But the truth, as revealed by the people who were there and the extensive research since, is just far more complex and more unsettling.
Right. The crushing of Japan's economic momentum wasn't an act of malice. It wasn't a U.S. conspiracy. It was an accident.
A catastrophic, unintended consequence of 5 powerful men trying to solve a different and very urgent problem, averting a global trade war.
And you could argue the Plaza Accord was necessary to do that. The fatal problem was really twofold. First, the incredible, disorderly speed of the dollar's devaluation, which sent too rapid and brutal a shockwave through Japan.
And second, the subsequent domestic policy misstep by the Bank of Japan in creating that ocean of cheap, speculative money.
Which brings us to the core reflection here, this fragility thesis of history. The reality that we inhabit is balanced on an incredibly delicate razor's edge. It's defined by these near misses and these massive overcorrections.
And we have to remember the threat they avoided.
Absolutely. Had Noboru Takeshita walked away from that table on September 20, 1985, the world would have almost certainly spiraled into a devastating protectionist trade war and a global recession. They successfully avoided one catastrophic cliff.
But by signing, they triggered an entirely different set of unforeseen dynamics.
Yeah.
As James Baker himself would later say, no one in that room could fully predict the precise channels that massive influx of cheap money would flow through once it was released into the Japanese system.
They expected productive investment.
We got pure speculation.
A more gradual currency adjustment, maybe, or a less extreme, more nuanced monetary policy from the BOJ. It could have changed everything. They had the right intent, but the execution and the subsequent internal policy reaction were just disastrous.
The profound lesson of the Plaza Accord is exactly that. It stands as both a monument to effective international cooperation. I mean, they did stop the trade war.
They did.
And a terrifying cautionary tale about the sheer power and complexity of the modern global economic system.
It's an engine we've built, but whose inner workings we still don't fully command. Its feedback loops can take a small, well-intentioned, 4-sentence press release and amplify it into a devastating, world-altering event that determines the fate of a nation for generations.
That economic malaise that began in 1990 is a ghost that still haunts Japan today, and it was born from that pivotal moment.
It just proves that the line between global stability and generational chaos, between a massive boom and a bust that lasts for decades, can be drawn in a single afternoon meeting.
Altered by the slight, almost imperceptible nod of one man.
So what does this extraordinary deep dive mean for you? The Plaza Accord shows us the profound fragility of our economic reality. If a handful of individuals in a single room on a single afternoon could reroute the entire river of history for generations, it raises an important question. What other invisible hinges is our modern economic reality turning on right now? Hinges that could send our current system into a boom or bust we never saw coming.
That is definitely something worth mulling over, a truly provocative thought to end on. Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.